Let me show you how to upgrade the suspension in your Aston Martin DB9. So welcome to another episode of Aston1936.com. This is a highly anticipated video series that people have been asking me to do for years, and I'm finally going to upgrade the suspension on my 2005 Aston Martin DB9. So my suspension's coming on 20 years old now. The struts aren't leaking, but it's fitted with what they called the Multimatic or Dynamic dampers. So it's essentially the original struts that went into the Aston Martin DB9 design. Those struts are kind of known to be a little bit of a harsh ride. So when you're driving around, you kind of feel every bump, but you don't really get great driving performance either. And Aston Martin realized this. So in the later versions of the DB9, once they started to fit the Sport Pack upgrade to this, that was Bilstein dampers. And then even in the later iterations of the DB9, they were fitting the Bilstein dampers as standard. So what do us early DB9 guys do? Well, with some advice from Mike at Bamford Rose, you fit the entire strut assemblies, springs, everything, from a 2012 Aston Martin DB9. So mine is a coupe with an automatic. If you go to the parts system and look up the spring assemblies for a 2012 Aston Martin coupe automatic, you get these. And I'll cover the parts in a little bit more detail, but essentially they come as a complete set. So you get the strut, the springs, the top bearing, everything. And it kind of turns it into a DIY project because all you have to do is a few nuts at the top, a big nut and bolt at the bottom, and swap them out. So if you're a little bit comfortable using a spanner, I think this is a project you can probably do yourself. So this is going to be a two-part series. In this first part, I'm going to cover the background of the struts. I'm going to cover the parts in detail. I'm going to cover some of the prerequisites, including measuring the ride height of the car. And in the second part, which will be a separate video, I'm going to cover how to install the rear struts. So fronts in part one, rears in part two, but in part two, I'm not going to do all the preamble. So stay tuned to the end of this video. I'll have a link to the part two coming up. So with that said, let's go ahead and take a look at what parts we need in detail. So let's take a little bit closer look at the specific parts. I have a set of springs for the front and I have a set for the rears. They're not identical, so you want to get fronts or rears for whatever you need. Like I said earlier, these are for a 2012 DB9 Coupe automatic. And that matches up what my cars are. You wouldn't want to just blindly take the same parts I've got if you have a different model of car, because it's potential that the spring rates are different. And if you actually come in for a closer look, these springs have little colors on them. So there's a red and a yellow. I bet you that means that's something to do with either the spring height or the spring rate. And if we look at the fronts over here, yeah, we've got an orange and a red. I don't know what those mean. Maybe if you're somebody out there that knows the magic Aston Martin decoding scheme for these, please leave me a comment down below. I'm also not sure when the crossover occurred between the original, kind of the not so great Multimatic Dynamic dampers and the Bilsteins. Which year was it? 2007, 2008? I'm not sure. But the best way you can find out if your early DB9 is fitted with the old Multimatic dampers is to actually get under the car and have a quick look at the heel of the strut assembly. So the Multimatic dampers are going to have a squared off edge, whereas the Bilsteins are going to have this curved bottom. So you can basically really easy tell if you've got Bilsteins or Multimatics fitted to your car. So that's what I would do, to get underneath and have a quick look. And I'll give you another look once I've got the first Multimatic out. I'll compare them on the bench for you. Also, if your car has an adjustable suspension, so some models of Aston Martin have a electronic button to firm up the suspension, these are not the parts for you. You have some completely different suspension spring setups. You'll have to do your own research for the parts, but there's still value in this video, I think. The whole process of changing these out is going to be the same, how to replace them, how to torque up the bolts. So you can still learn something from this video, including checking the ride height. So Steve, why aren't you using aftermarket coilover suspension parts? Great question. I'm not trying to build a track car. I mean, people have contacted me about trying out sets of coilover systems in my car. But honestly, when I thought about it, I just want the stock ride height. I want the best possible factory feel for the GT car. Now, a lot of engineering went into these parts. This is 7 years into the production run, and Aston Martin's engineers and Bilstein's engineers probably knew what they were doing. So I'm going to rely on them that they came up with probably the best combination of comfort and performance, and that's what's in these parts. So it's probably worth it for me to invest in the original parts at this point. So I would suggest that you reach out and contact your local Aston Martin dealer, or if you're somebody that has to order your parts online, check out Scuderia or Aston Martin Bits or whoever you use for your online parts, and see about getting a set of the actual Aston Martin ones. What are some of the differences that might exist with the aftermarket coilovers? Well, I think they put a lot of design into comfort in these systems. So if you look here actually at the heel, where this attaches to the lower control arm, there's actually rubber isolating bushes in here. That's to stop road noise from transmitting up into the car. And if we look up at the top spring plate, we'll actually see that there's a rubber pad up here. I don't know if the coilover companies worry about comfort like that, and perhaps what they do is they just put solid rose joints in the bottom. They don't worry about a rubber isolator at the top because it's a track car, it's for performance. I'm old now. I want to sit in a car that's comfortable to drive hour after hour. So I'm interested in the comfort as well as having good handling when I'm on the road, driving on the highways and in the city streets. So this is probably one of those situations then where it's worth the investment to get yourself the OEM parts. It'll fit right in. We know these things are going to work, and it'll be the easiest to install for you. All right, Steve, enough blathering. So what specific parts did you order? Well, cameraman Rob might come in here, and I'll cut in on some details below. So the front spring set are a 9G43-18B036-revision AE. So those are the fronts for a DB9 Coupe automatic, and the rears are a 9G43-18W002 revision CF. And these are the ones for the rears on a DB9 Coupe automatic. So I'll cut in some prices. I'll probably check out what the online prices are. You can always go in and talk to your dealer and see if you get a price break on a full set like this. They're not inexpensive, but I think they're worth it. And I don't think coilovers are inexpensive either. So why am I doing all four? Because you'd be crazy not to. If you have the old 20-year-old old Multimatics, the performance and the damping of these will be different. So if I were to just do the fronts in Bilstein and keep the backs as Multimatics, I think you'd have wacky driving performance and handling characteristics. So I'd certainly do the whole set if I could. I would never just do an individual corner. If one of your springs breaks and you would just go get one, well, I would always do a pair. So if you were already on Bilsteins and you just broke a corner, do a front end at least, do them in pairs. And sort of that's my strategy. I think that's just typical automotive strategy for taking care of suspension parts. All right, enough blathering about parts. I mentioned ride height. So this is the final thing I wanted to show you here on the bench. Aston Martin didn't design parts with Bilstein for every individual car. So what they actually did that's quite crafty, these are semi-adjustable ride height components. And if cameraman Rob sneaks in for a look from the side, you're going to see between these two springs here, there's a little slot. And what that slot is that's a slot for a circlip. And if we come back around and we look at this spring base, you can actually probably just see that there's a circlip peeking through this little gap there. So if we were to disassemble this whole spring assembly, take the nut off the top, use a spring compressor properly, take this apart, we could actually take this bottom plate, slide it up, take that split clip, spring clip off, move it up into this slot, and that's almost an inch. 25 millimeters of rise. So if you needed to raise the ride height of your car, one of the models must need this spring at that height. And conversely, over here on the front, we can actually see one of the grooves probably about 5 millimeters down from the existing slot that they shipped it in for my DB9. So these are sort of slightly adjustable springs. So if you find at the end that your ride height isn't quite right, and it happens to either be that it's 5 millimeters too tall and you want to adjust it, you could go to the trouble of fixing that. Or you could raise the back of the car by almost an inch from the looks of it. And there may be other slots in there, I just can't see them. So just thought I would point that out. So now I mentioned ride height. How do we actually measure the ride height on the car? So let me show you. So one of the simple things we're going to do before we start the project is to document the existing original ride height of the car. Now, Aston Martin has a process for this. They actually have a guide in the manual that tells you how to measure the ride height. And what they actually are saying is they want you to measure the ride height magically from the center of the wheel hub to the highest point of the wheel arch. And it should be something like 378.5 millimeters. Well, how the heck are you going to keep your tape on the exact right spot in the center of the wheel hub? So I'm going to show you a little tip for that. But basically why they actually even publish this spec is that over time they say that your car suspension can settle almost 20 millimeters. That's 3/4 of an inch. As the springs get tired, the shocks get tired, the suspension bits get tired. So you might find it's worthwhile, just even if you haven't started doing this project, to go out and measure your ride height and see if your suspension is sagging quite a bit, because you wouldn't notice it change over time. Maybe you've got a broken spring, maybe one side's going to be different from the other, and if you had that scenario, it might explain all sorts of weird little handling and steering issues you might be having. So it's worth going out and checking the ride height in your car. So let me show you how I'm going to approach measuring the ride height, but not from the center of the wheel hub. So if you just happen to have a spare rim sitting over here like I do, what I decided to do was measure the width of the rim, and it's 20.5 inches. And so I know that half the diameter of that would put me exactly in the center of the wheel hub. So now if I come over to the wheel, and if I measure from the bottom lip of the rim, which is a much easier place to get a reference, and now I can measure up, and I swing the tape back and forth, and I'm watching what is the actual measurement to the bottom of the fender opening, and that is 24 11/16. And that's you saw how I swung the tape back and forth, and essentially you will find the furthest away point by doing that. So if you come over and do the math, so I'm 24 11/16 inches, that turns out to be 627 millimeters. And their spec for the center to the fender was supposed to be 378.5. And if you add half the distance of a rim, which is 260.35 millimeters, essentially I measured out 627 millimeters. The spec is 378, and what that means is that my front end on this corner is sagging 11 millimeters, just under half an inch. I've gone around the car and I've done all 4 corners, and my right front was sagging 10 millimeters, and my rears were almost exactly on spec. So when I put the car back together after I've done the spring change, I'll want to actually see that I'm at the desired ride height. And so I can catch if I've got some mistake going on with my spring and where those clips are and stuff like that. So before we start putting in the new strut, there's a couple of prerequisites that I've already done videos for, so I'm not going to show you in this video. The first is we need to take off the engine strut cross brace, the one that goes across here. I've already removed it because this is the actual strut tower. So we're going to be removing this, so the brace has to come off first. That's a couple of T50 Torx bolts. And of course, since we're going to be taking the suspension out, we're going, I've got it off the ground so you can watch my video for how to get it up on a jack stand. You're probably doing the pair, so it's not just going to be do it on the jack, so you're going to want to get at least the whole front end off the ground on jack stands. Take the wheel off, obviously. I've got a video for that if you don't know how. And now, in the video, you're going to see I've got my fender liner removed. That's not strictly necessary. You might need to do it to get to some of the bolts, but I'm doing a couple of other projects right now, so I have my fender liner out. So if you find you can't get to one of the bolts, you got to take your fender liner out. So we don't really need any exotic tools or supplies, but I wanted to go over them so you could be ready when it's time to do it. One of the things I've actually got is the official Aston Martin workshop manual guide that I've purchased from the Tech Info website. So I get my torque specs and stuff like that that I'll be mentioning during the video. So what do we have here? Well, I have a interior or a clip removal tool, so that's going to be handy. You'll see how. I have a pick that actually loops back, and you're going to see I'm going to use that to tug on an electrical connector. You might be able to invent a different way. I'm also going to use a small flat blade screwdriver at the same time while I'm releasing an electrical connector. I have a 15 millimeter box end wrench. It doesn't have to be this long style, but you'll need a 15 millimeter wrench. I have an 18 millimeter wrench. I have a bendy head ratchet, which is going to be kind of handy, but you could probably do it with just about any ratchet. A heavy duty 21 millimeter socket, 6-point 18 millimeter socket, and I actually prefer 6-point. So if you have those, that's a 15 millimeter socket. I have a deep 13, and you will need a deep. So a deep 13, a short extension. Then some of the usual tools. I have my Cobb inspection light. For those of you in the UK, you're probably certainly going to need a healthy dose of penetrating oil. You might want to use that to loosen up some of the nuts before you go at them. I'm going to use a little white lithium grease as well to lubricate a couple of the bolts. I'm going to use a little blue painter's tape to protect my fender. I'll show you how during the video. I have a 3/8 inch torque wrench. This will be doing some 90 Newton meter and some 115 Newton meter. And then one of the bolts has to be torqued to 175 Newton meters. So I have my bigger heavy duty 1/2 inch click style torque wrench. I've got an electric 3/8 nut driver here. That's just optional, some rags. And I have a bungee cord, which you are going to need to strap up the brake caliper during the process. Okay, well, glasses on, gloves on. Let's get started. So the first step is actually going to be to protect this gorgeous paint. When you're taking, at least I found when I practiced this, when I took the big strut in and out, I was awfully close with the threaded tops to it, to bumping into this fender arch. So it's just some quick insurance to run some tape along this edge. You don't need to do what you want for your car, but that only takes a second. And now if I bump into that lip, at least there'll be some layer of protection to save the day. So next up, what I want to do is crack the bolts loose. So I'm going to start by these 3 top mount bolts. Now this is where you probably need a deep socket. There's one here, and one back here. And so these are 13 millimeter, and they're not very tight. So I just want to make sure they're loose to start with, and they're not seized. So that's good. And we'll come back and remove those at the just as we're ready to get the strut out. So next up, we're going to use the 21 millimeter and a breaker bar or torque wrench, and we're going to loosen the lower strut mounting bolt. And it's a 21 millimeter nut, and it's back here. So, and we just need to break it loose. And if it spins, the other side is an 18 millimeter nut head or bolt head. So we cracked that loose, so we're good. Next up, we're actually going to loosen off, and we can even remove the nuts on these upper control arm bolts. So we're going to swing this upper control arm out of the way eventually. So this is the 15 millimeter wrench inside, and then you're seeing here, there's a little slot where my finger is, and I can just get, with an extension, it goes through the slot. All right, so I've loosened it all the way off. You saw my socket actually started riding on the shoulder, and I'm stuck here right now. But I'm going to just give it a tap, and we should be able to push the bolt through. And that nuts out. Now we just do the same for the other side. All right, that one's out. We'll leave the bolts in place for now. So now we need to free up some of the wiring harnesses that are attached to the upper control arm before we can move it free. And this is where your trim clip removal tool can be handy. Get in underneath. Work these out carefully. You can reuse them if you don't break them off, so it's worth taking the time to do it properly. We also have to do it on the other side. This is the brake wear sensor. If you break these off, I'll have a link to the actual Aston Martin zip tie part for that. I'm also going to remove it from the frame rail, just so it's got some more slack. So that'll be quite free when I need it to be. And I think I'm even going to free it up from the brake bleed nipple. So now it's even, it can fall away all the way like that. So now we have to worry about releasing this cable. So this is the one for the ABS sensor, the wheel speed sensor. And this is where I was, this might be seized on. Basically you push on this little front tab and you try and wiggle this thing out. I found that actually you can put a small blade screwdriver in, and that's sort of like a permanent thing pushing on the tab, and then it sort of frees you up to so that's off, and now you can basically take that cable and put it someplace safe. Just remember, you're going to have to hook it back up. All right, so next up I'm going to remove the upper control arm bolts. Now I've done a whole video on replacing the upper control arm in the past, so you could always look at that if you needed more details. But I'm going to use my bungee cord now, and I'm actually going to come around, try and find a place under the chassis. And if we can look, I'm actually hooking into the casting here. There's a little recess. And then I'm going to come around, and I'm going to catch two of the studs like that. And then I'm going to look for some place to anchor the top. And there just happens to be that bracket up there. So what I'm hoping is that will kind of keep this thing from all falling back against me. So with that in place, now I'm just going to push these bolts back through to the center. So I have a I don't want to monkey up my threads too bad. So one bolt out. And what you'll probably find, since the weight's hanging on this now, is that if you do a little lift, you might be able to get that. And if it doesn't move, you can improvise. Out it comes. Okay, so now what I'm going to try to do is probably take out the big bottom bolt and release the front hub from the strut entirely. So we've already loosened that off, so this shouldn't be too hard. And we should be able to get that bolt to start to move out. if you come around and look at the front, you'll find that the bolt can't quite come out because it runs into the tie rod end. That problem will solve itself here shortly once we loosen up the upper control arm. So now I think we're ready to literally just pull these back and out. And we're free. And now we can come around and look at this bolt, and I can tip the whole assembly forward and take the bolt out. So the reason this, one thing you really need to be careful of here is we still have the brake line connected. And that's right here. We do not want to let this whole assembly slip forward and you hang entirely on this brake line. So that's what this is doing for us. So now the bottom of the strut, you can see, is loose, and it's time for us to get those top 3 bolts out so we can remove it. So I'm going to do a little something that may or may not matter. I'm going to mark, just going to put a black dot here on the bolt that's on the front outer, because I just want to know when I'm putting the new strut back in the orientation of the top plate. So that might help me later. And now we can just quickly zip those 3 nuts off using the deep socket. And you want to be careful not to lose that nut down somewhere. And there we can see the top of the strut tower. All right, so now it should be ready to break free. If you look in here, you'll see that it's still sitting in essentially in its saddle. And if we bring the front hub forward, I should be able to just side slip it now once I'm out of the thing, and I can bring this down. And now you can see why I put the tape on. Tip it forward and we're out. So there's my old strut. Wasn't really leaking. And if we look at, there's my black mark on the top. It was sitting in this orientation. So label was to the front, that bolt was at the front. And I'm going to sit it down because it's heavy. Right. That's the front of the car. There's the label. There's the horizontal. So when I have my new strut sitting here, that's the matching orientation. I've got a visual clue as these little spring color codes are sitting out, and the label's at the back. And you'll notice that if I lined it up this way, which it has to be with the label facing the front, this bolt's in the wrong place. So that's why I wanted to take a look. So I know got to have these. Now you might be able to turn this top plate, but that top plate's also keyed into the top of the spring. So you'd have to rotate against all the spring tension. It's probably not worth the pain. It's probably worth just actually doing what I did here and taking a look before you put it in. Now, before I put this back in, and this is sitting here just like this, if you're contemplating replacing your upper control arm, this is the time. If you've got the creak that happens to many of the DB9s, where when the car is cold and you're backing out of the driveway or whatever, and the first time the suspension moves in the morning, you get this wee, 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 wee. Well, that's the infamous bushing creep. And you can actually see I've got it here. There's a tiny little thumbnail of space between this purple bushing and the aluminum housing. That should be tight. And this bushing gets loose and starts to walk around. So if you're going to put in a new Aston Martin upper control arm, because Aston doesn't sell these bushings separately, this would be a great time because you've done most of the work already. You just have to undo the upper ball joint. Or if you're going to try a polyurethane bushing kit, obviously this is the time to do it. You could just take these out right here while you're working on it on the car, fit the new bushings and put them in. Maybe in a future video you might see me fitting polyurethane bushings, since mine is creeping for the second time. So I don't think the Aston replacement arm is going to last forever. Okay, so time to fit the new spring. Stripes out. I'm going to try to do it exactly the way I took it out. get it in. Now I'm trying to get it up into the holes first, then pull this back away, put it in, and now it's loosely in place. So before I put the hardware back in, I'm just going to do a quick bit of maintenance to it. I'm going to hit the threads with a little bit of just generic lube, just so that the nuts rattle on easier. And because these things have to slide through the control arms, I'm going to hit them with a little bit of white lithium grease and just do a quick smear on the shaft part, just so they slip through the component a little easier. Let's put the big bolt through the strut to a lower control arm mounting point. So I'm starting here deliberately, so while I have the top still loosey-goosey, I can wiggle this around to like find my mounting point. The bolt goes from the front of the car to the back of the car. And then I'm basically going to fit the nut. And that's all we need to do for now. We're not going to tighten any of that up again until we actually have the car back on its own weight. So now we're going to swing the upper control arm back into place and jiggle it in. Yes. There's lots of positions where it feels like it's binding, so you find just the one magic one where it's square to the opening. There we go. Now these bolts go also from the middle. The bolts are identical, so it doesn't matter which one you start with. And voila. Oops. And get the nut loosely started. So as I said earlier, the Aston Martin manual says you do not tighten these completely until the suspension is back under full load. I'll show you how to do that at the end, so don't go gonzo at this step and just air wrench these on. There's a procedure we're going to follow. So those were loosely started up, so I'm going to actually get them down to where they're vaguely snug. So these are not tight, they're just loosely snugged. I can take out my straining strap now. I'm going to do the same for the big bottom bolt and get this snugged up but not tight. Okay, so that can still turn. We can probably, before I forget about them, refit some of our cabling. So this basically pushes back into its hole. That pushes back into its hole. And there was actually one more clip here that I actually didn't even undo in the video. It just was loose, I guess, on my car. So that holds it to the thing. So basically that's clicked in, and those three are set. And now we'll redo this, the brake wear sensor, hooking it back over the bleed nipple cap. And then back into its holes. 1, 2, and 3. All right, so now we're going to refit this. Should be pretty straightforward. Don't drop these off into the abyss below. Get them loosely started first. This one's a little tricky because it's hiding behind this hose. And as always, start everything by hand. Don't use a tool, an air wrench. Now I'm going to switch to some power tools. And then these torque up to 23 Newton meters. So they're not really super heavy duty because they're under compression. Okay, with those done, now we're going to get the car set up to put it back under load because we can't tighten those upper control arm bushes or that lower mounting bush unless the suspension is flexed up into its resting position. So that's kind of a trick. Like, do you put the wheel back on, but how do you get your tools back in with the wheel back on? And in my first video where I did the upper control arms, that was a real battle. So in this video, I'm going to use my friend, the trusty jack stand. And if we get down underneath from the front and have a look-see. So basically, I'm going to use my jack stand. And this, you don't want to come down on this brake dust. You don't want to come down right on the end of the lower ball joint bolt. You don't want to come down on the rotor because it can rotate. You could probably come down on this edge of the lower control arm. But I'm going to come down on the hub right here because there's enough material and this will clear. And so we'll get that lined up and we'll lower it down until basically all the weight transfers onto the jack stand and comes off of my actual lift. So now we're loaded. We're clear on the lift. My fingers can get under there. And you know, the suspension arm is flexed up under the engine's weight. I'm still not going to put the cross brace in until I'm actually on the ground with the wheels attached. But this has got the suspension flexed up into its loaded position. So now I'm going to tighten up these upper control arm bolts and this lower mounting bolt for the strut. So let's start with these. So with my torque wrench set to 115 Newton meters, which is quite a bit for a 3/8 drive, my 6-point socket, and I can start to torque these. Now, if your inner bolt head is spinning, you can get a wrench on there, but it's already frozen for me. So I got to get in here and heave. Come around to the front one. Tight. All right. So with the two uppers tightened, we're going to just do the big bolt on the bottom now. So got my 21 millimeter, got my wrench set to 175 Newton meters, which is a lot. And just ease up the torque. And that's that. Little warning, I'm on tryptophan. It's US Thanksgiving here now, yesterday, and I just had the big turkey lunch the day after, so I'm sitting here in the, oh, I'm so sleepy post-turkey things, but it gives me a lot of time to actually work on the car on this 4-day weekend, so happy Thanksgiving. So, put the car back down on the ground, as we said, because the suspension was back together. Torqued on the wheels. I left the fender liner out because I had mine out. And I took the car for a decent run around the neighborhood to make sure I worked the suspension to get it all settled in. I've driven it back into the shop. I've done one other after the project thing right now. I've put the engine cross brace back in, and you can see my video for how to do that here. Piece of advice I got from an Aston Martin factory technician was these bolts are designed to be torqued to 50 Newton meters. But they're known to creak a little bit, so he said up the torque by about 20%, so I torqued them to 60 Newton meters. They're big T50s, it has no problem taking that level of torque. So I have that reinstalled, and now I want to measure the ride height. So just like we did at the beginning of the project. I'm going to measure from the bottom of the wheel lip to the tallest part of the wheel arch. And I am at just about 25 3/8, maybe just a hair more than that. And you can go around to all four corners and measure yours. Let's head over to the bench and I'll show you my results. So I've measured all four corners. My front left was 25 3/8, and my other three corners were all 25 1/2. And that's about 1/2 inch to 5/8 of an inch higher than my original results that went from a low of 24 11/16 up to 25 1/8. And I've done the math, because I gotta be me. So here's the actual official Aston Martin range. So the ride height should be between 24.56 inches on the front up to 25.74. Well, I'm 25 1/2, so I'm just near the top end of the range. And for the rears, between 24 1/2 essentially to just over 25 1/2. And I'm 25 1/2. I also like the fact that my car is essentially sitting at the same height on all four corners, as opposed to the way it was before, where it was wonky. I was 11 millimeters low at the front left. I was correct at the rears. Aston actually talks about you could be up to 20 millimeters low after settling over time. So you want to be on the high end of this scale. So right now, if this was the scale, and that's perfect, I'm right about there. But 20 millimeters over the life of the car is here, which is what we're going to expect for it to settle. So you want to start high so that when the car gets some miles and years on it, you're still well within the range. So that's a result, even heights, and I'm in spec. So that wasn't a very hard project. Probably if I was a DIYer, I would say plan for an hour on each corner of the car. So if you're going to do all four, you would have basically a nice comfortable Saturday out in your shop doing the work. You need to finish up putting the car together right. So if you had your fender liners out, got to take your wheel off, get your fender liner back in. Video on how to do that up here. Torque your wheels properly. Spec up here, might be on screen as well. So what I'm probably going to lead up to next is doing a driving impression video, just to sort of see what's it all like running on Bilstein suspension now, and I'm doing some suspension bushing work as well. So my next video, which you'd want to watch next, is I'm going to be part 2 of this series where we do the rear Bilstein upgrade. And then if you're just to tease it a little bit, I'm looking at doing the front polyurethane bushing upgrade on my car as well. So you'll see that video coming soon too. So if you all like information like this, please go ahead and check out my companion blog article. There's all sorts of information on how to take care of your own Aston Martin. Up here, you'll find a link to the next video in the series. Definitely going to be the rear suspension and upgrades as well. Down here, if you would please like and subscribe to the channel, you'll get automatically notified when the next video comes out. And as always, I love to hear your comments. Did I do this project right? Would you do something differently? Please leave those down below. Thanks for watching.